Bruce Caswell is with us here. I think this is a rescheduled thing, right, Bruce?
That's correct, Andy.
Well, it's like you're busy or something.
Well, one or two things going on.
One or two things going on. I want to ask you about a national story, and I know you've got a lot to cover about what's happening in the state today, but I want to get your thoughts on what's happening nationally with the potential government shutdown. Huge stories today about that, and obviously a lot of politics involved. Should our listeners be concerned about that? Is that really going to affect people here in Michigan? What do you think about what's happening in Washington?
Well, in terms of Michigan, no, I think most of the stuff that we do here will keep going. I really don't know particulars, Andy, to be honest with you. I don't get home till usually 9:30, 10 at night, and I haven't paid that close attention to things. So, you know, the only thing I've heard is that they're saying that if it shuts down that the military won't get paid. There's been a couple other things I've heard, but I think that's probably the main point, and they ought to be paid, and it's pretty simple. So either change the law and get it done lickety-split, or figure something out. But goodness gracious, you can't have men and women going over there dying for us and not getting paid. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I don't know all the details out there. But I do believe Governor Snyder come out the other day, and I think it's accurate that we'll be all right in terms of all the stuff we do here in Michigan. Michigan State's government, and that affects probably people more directly than anything else with all the different programs we run. So I think we'll be okay.
A couple of ways you can ask questions of the state senator. You can call us at 437-4444, and Julie, write that down for us. Also, you can email those in at WCSRinc@comcast.net. The first thing I wanted to ask you about is this emergency manager bill. I read your editorial that you sent, or your letter to the Hillsdale Daily News about that. You know, there have been a lot of, I think, misconceptions about that bill, and you tried to clear some of those up in what you wrote for the newspaper. Why did you vote for that, and why is it a good policy for Michigan?
Well, first of all, let me explain just a little bit. When the bill, if you're a municipality or a school district, and as a municipality, you could be a county, you could be a city, you could be a village. If you get yourself in financial trouble, and there's a whole bunch of triggers that would indicate that you're in financial trouble, the first thing the state will do is come down and look at what's going on, and will say to you, okay, these are the problems, you've got to get it straightened out, you take care of it. And you'll be given the opportunity to do that. And you being the municipality, the unions that are involved, the administrators, everybody. If you don't do that, okay, and we've got about 30 cities in the state that haven't done that, then what we now have in place is at the end of the day we'll send in this emergency manager, and he's going to clean up the mess for you. Why did I vote for it? Well, number one, if any of our municipalities or school districts go bankrupt, it's going to have a huge effect on everybody in the state, not just that municipality. Number two, I don't think anybody in this state who lives in a school district or a municipality that is financially responsible and has taken the necessary hits, whether it's not getting wage increases or it's getting wage cuts, whatever it might be, I don't think they ought to have to pay to bail somebody else out who's been totally irresponsible when it comes to financial issues. So I think it's just an issue of clean up your own mess, and you'll never hear from the state. You'll never have a problem. And if you don't want to do that, why should everybody else have to pay your bill? I don't think they should. That's why I voted for it.
Fair enough. On the emergency manager bill, Bruce Caswell joining us this afternoon. The next item you mentioned is the unemployment bill. As I understand it, and I don't think that I followed it as closely as maybe I should have, but Michigan is the only state in the country now that will offer 26 weeks of unemployment insurance, or will offer 20 instead of 26. And Governor Snyder was quoted as saying he wants to turn the conversation toward creating jobs and not having people unemployed instead of people needing to rely on those benefits. But obviously people who've been out of work for a long time through no fault of their own have to be wondering about this. Where did you come down on that?
Well, I voted for that bill, and the bill came through. It had two pieces. The first piece was we're going to extend the feds had extended unemployment insurance for another 20 weeks for folks, and we had to either approve, as a state, either approve or disapprove that 20-week extension. So the first part of this bill approved that 20-week extension. Okay, so anybody that's unemployed right now based on the criteria that's involved with that extension, will get another 20 weeks. Okay, it'll take them out to the end of whatever they were promised. People are getting 99 weeks total. Okay, the second piece of the bill came back, and business people pay for unemployment benefits. It doesn't come from the government. Michigan is currently $3.9 billion in debt to the federal government for the money that we've borrowed over the last, well, how long has this been going on? 10 years, 8 years. We're that far in debt. And what the business people basically said, and I wasn't involved with the discussions, I got this secondhand, but they basically said, look, we've got this huge debt to pay back. We can't continue to fund this thing at 26 weeks. And the average, and I know nobody's going to believe this, okay? I know you won't because you've seen so many other stories, but the average time in Michigan for people on unemployment is just a shade over 20 weeks. Now, we all know there's people who've been out a lot longer, but I'm telling you that's the statistics they gave us was 20 weeks. And so we funded the state unemployment at 20 weeks. Now, once you get done with the state unemployment, then you can flip over to federal unemployment, which businesses still pay, okay? But it's a different system. And so basically, by putting that state unemployment piece in place and reducing it back to 20 weeks, we're saving small businesses, medium-sized businesses, so on, somewhere in the neighborhood of $600 million to $1 billion a year by moving them more quickly over to the federal side. Now, I'll grant you this. At the end of the day, okay, by reducing that back, okay, people aren't going to get the full 99 weeks of unemployment benefits if they become unemployed after the 1st of next year. So anybody that gets unemployed this year, number one, you're going to get your 20 weeks extension. Number two, you're going to get, if you're unemployed this year, you're going to get things just like they've always been. But after the 1st of the year, if you become unemployed, okay, then you're going to get a reduced amount of unemployment.
If this is such a, I mean, it makes sense to hear you talk about it, but if it's such a great idea, just to play the devil's advocate, and I've heard a little bit of the debate, why are we the only state in the country doing this? Is it because we've got the best policy? Or I think some have said that, in the state that's probably been hit hardest by this recession, we really can be the state that's least able to cut unemployment benefits to people. Obviously, you didn't see it that way, but what do you say to people that are concerned about that?
Well, Andy, we were the first state to do it. There have now been, I understand, 3 other states that have done the same thing.
I didn't know that. And
Missouri, I believe, I'm not sure it's finalized down there, but Missouri is refusing to even do the 20-week extension. The fact of the matter is we're really deeply in debt all across this country because of the continued unemployment extensions and everything. And that's, I'm not blaming anybody for that or anything else, but folks, at the end of the day, Andy, somebody's got to pay for everything. Mm-hmm. There's no free rides. And we've got a huge debt in this state, and other states have the same thing of trying to get out from under. And back in the early 80s, when things were really bad, it took us about 12 years as a state to get out from under the debt that we ran up then. And we didn't have nearly the unemployment extensions. It didn't go out to 99 weeks that we do now because things snapped back in about 2-3 years. Mm-hmm. Well, they're not snapping back, and I don't think they're going to snap back to any great degree. So it's going to continue to be a problem. It really is. Yep. That's the best I can tell you.
Bruce Caswell joining us. If you have any questions, you can call us at 437-4444, or you can hit the email at wcsrinc@comcast.net. I had an email that came in a couple of days ago that Julie forwarded to me, and I showed it to you before we went on the air because I really don't know a lot about this, but I think it gets to this item pricing law.
Yep.
Can you explain, give people a little background about that?
Well, the item pricing law, Michigan required, under the old law, Michigan required that when you go into a supermarket, for instance, every item had to have its own individual price on the item. So there was a little sticker there that said 45 cents. The argument for quite some time, and this has been talked about in Michigan for quite a few years, is just put the price on the shelf. We don't need to put the price on every item. It's costly. It's a lot of money, and so on and so forth, and it's not necessary. I heard from people, actually, Andy, it probably was about a 50-50 split from the people I heard from. And I didn't hear from a lot of people on it. But the ones I did hear from was about a 50-50 split to quit doing that. Some people wanted it kept, and some people wanted to quit doing it. And I'll tell you very matter-of-factly, my wife was one that wanted it kept, okay? But she said, when I get home and I want to compare my price of the item to my cash register receipt. How can I do that? And, I talked to her, and I said, well, bottom line, I said, you can take a little marker pen with you, felt tip pen, and just as you pick the item off the shelf, write the price on it. And I said, that's a way that you can do it. The governor came out, to get rid of this item pricing, and he said it was going to save about $2.2 billion. Now, no offense to the governor, I don't know if it's going to save that kind of money or not, okay? That's a number that's just out there. But it did make sense. It's kind of an old style thing. It does take time. It does take money for the stores to do this. And if you put everything on the shelf, and I know like your Myers, and they don't always work very well, I'll be the first to grant you, they've got their little scanners that you can go scan your item in, and you can see the price and so on. So basically it was just saying, this is nice, but it's not necessary, and we can save a lot of money, and it's part of, again, trying to make Michigan more attractive for business. And this was one way that we felt we could do it. And as I say, you can still mark yourself as you go through the store. You can mark items, and people say, well, that's a pain in the hind end. Well, that's the same thing the business people were saying to us about putting the sticker price on. It was a pain in the hind end. So that's why I voted for it. It just seemed to make sense. It was time to go.
Okay. Bruce Caswell, our state senator, joining us. We're going to take a short break and be back with more questions for State Senator Caswell right after this on WCSR.
Let Edward Jones of Hillsdale County serve your investment needs. Call John Waldvogel, Brett King, or Don Toffolo today at 1-800-ED-JONES.
There are plenty of good ways to make hay with Pioneer brand alfalfa varieties, but a successful crop always starts by matching the right product to the right acre. Yield, forage quality, winter hardiness, standability, insect or disease pressure, and management practices play an important role in choosing the right variety. That's why Pioneer devotes intensive research and product development to offering customers the broadest range of choices, including high-yielding, high-quality, winter-hardy, and excellent disease-resistant varieties that fit their individual programs. One of the most popular and productive choices is 55B48. This muscle variety delivers an excellent agronomic package and winter hardiness while providing outstanding forage yield. Other new Pioneer varieties offer the Genuity Roundup Ready technology to growers looking for simple, cost-effective weed control. No matter how complex the variables, a Pioneer sales professional can provide the right answers.
Pioneer, science with service, delivering success.
Hillsdale Academy invites you to experience Peter Pan and Wendy, showing Friday, April 8th at 7 p.m. and Saturday, April 9th at 2 and 7 p.m. at the Sauk Theater in downtown Jonesville. Thanks to show sponsors, the Academy presents flying effects throughout the show. Tickets are $7 and are available at the Academy or at the door. You won't want to miss Hillsdale Academy's performance of Peter Pan and Wendy, Friday, April 8th at 7 p.m. or Saturday, April 9th at 2 and 7 p.m. at the Sauk Theater in Jonesville.
Bruce Caswell joining us here on WCSR. We've got to talk about, obviously, the budgets. I think I heard you tell Julie in the lobby your recess is over the end of this week?
Yeah.
And then you go back up to Lansing and get back to work. Obviously, the budget's on everybody's mind right now. Governor Snyder has introduced some very controversial budget items to try to get the state back on track. And what's the next step in that process?
Well, you're going to see, the last 2 weeks, I've spent up in Lansing, and I've got my budget done. In fact, I answered a few final questions this morning. I didn't go up this morning, but I've been up there the rest of this week and last week. You're going to see budgets move out of the Senate, I believe, next week. And I tell everybody these budgets are going to be, to a certain extent, unrealistic, because until all of the tax issues are settled up in Lansing, what we're going to tax, how much, and all this kind of stuff, the budgets are just kind of hanging out there. The governor campaigned on and is attempting to deliver on his promise of cutting the business tax or changing the business tax from what we currently have to a 6% tax on corporations. Okay, now for those of you that don't know, there's other types of businesses like S-corps, partnerships, and so on. Those types of businesses, the income flows through to the individual, and the individual pays tax based on the income tax rate in Michigan, which is 4.25%. The governor wants a 6% tax on just C-corps. Now, keep that thought in mind for a second. We started off the year, you heard lots of numbers floating out in the newspapers, but the bottom line is we started off this year, or for next year, we started off with a deficit of $1.2 billion. The governor presented a budget that basically made the necessary cuts to eliminate that $1.2 billion deficit. So set that off to the side and forget about it for a minute. But then the governor came back, and if we make this business tax change, which he's suggesting, the new business taxes are going to be about $700 million. The old business taxes were about $2.2 billion. So we're going to have another $1.5 billion hole, roughly. Now, the governor's solution to filling in that hole was primarily to do two things. Number one was to eliminate the earned income tax credit in Michigan. Now, that went into effect about 3 years ago. He's proposing to eliminate it, and if he does, if it's successful, that'll save the state about $350 million. The second proposal that he put in place was to tax pensions, not Social Security, but pensions. Okay? Now, I've been asked questions like, would it tax military pensions? No, it won't. Currently, in Michigan today, it's kind of a hodgepodge. If you have a public pension from a governmental agency or a school, you pay no taxes on that pension, no state taxes. You do pay federal taxes on that pension. If you have a private pension, now I'm talking here like a defined benefit. In other words, the old pensions that we used to have where you were guaranteed, let's say, $1,000 every month for as long as you live. If you have that kind of a pension and it's private, if you're an individual, the first $45,000 that you pay on that pension, or that you get on that pension, you don't pay any tax on. Everything over that you would pay. If you're a couple, the first $90,000 that you get in your pension, you don't pay any taxes on. Everything over that you would. So the way it is right now is just the very wealthiest people who are getting private pensions only are paying Michigan income tax. Then we have kind of an oddball thing with 401ks. If you have a 401k, any money that you put into that 401k that is matched by your employer, so you put in 4%, your employer matches it, you don't pay any tax on that. But if you put in 7% and your employer only puts in 4%, the 4 and the 4 match, you don't pay tax on, but the 3% extra that you put in, you will pay tax on currently, under current law. So it's kind of a hodgepodge thing right now. Now, the governor's proposing to tax everything, all pensions, public, private, you name it, from $1. Okay? So if you're making $10,000 a year, okay, the governor is saying to you that you'll pay on your pension, he's saying you'll pay 4.25% next year on that, which would be what, $425. All right? Now, the other piece that he's kind of putting together with the pension piece, Andy, is the property tax. And most people don't even know that they're getting this, but they are. In Michigan today, if you are an elderly person, you only pay 3.5% of your income. Let's say your total income, pension, Social Security, everything, is $20,000 a year. You would pay the first 3.5% of your property taxes based on that $20,000. So 3.5% of $20,000 is $700. You'd pay $700 of your property taxes. You then would apply to the state when you file your income tax forms for a rebate of everything over that. So if your property tax bill was $1,300, you pay $700. The other $600 would come back to you as part of your refund on your income tax. And most people don't even know it's for the property tax. They think it's something to do with the income tax, but it's property tax. If you're a poor person in Michigan today, you own a home, but you don't make very much money, you pay the first 3.5%, and then everything over that, you get 60% of that amount back from the government. from the state. So if you're old, you get 100% back of everything over the 3.5. If you're not old but poor, you can get 3.5% back, or you can get 60% back. And I know it's very confusing, folks, but the bottom line is that the governor, what his proposal was, is he said, let's make it the same for everybody. 80% for seniors, okay, you get 80% back. 80% for poor people, you get back. And the only ones that would be left at 100% would be the disabled. Now, that could be paraplegics, quadriplegics, mentally impaired, those kind of folks. They'd still get, after the first 3.5%, they'd get everything back. So, basically, on the property tax side of things, if you're young but poor and you own a home, you could get a little bit more back. If you're old, okay, you're going to get a little bit less back. Okay? So that's the two main pieces that make up all this thing. And I've gotten a lot of mail on the pension piece. I've gotten no mail on the property tax piece because I don't think anybody understands it, quite frankly.
Right.
So that's what we're looking at. And that's the governor's proposal. And his argument he put forward was this. If Mrs. McGillicuddy is working at Myers as a greeter and she's making $10 an hour, she's paying 4.25% tax on that $10. But if you've got Mrs. Smith, who's getting a pension to home, she's getting that money, and she's not paying any tax on it. And his comment was, is that fair? Got a point. On the other hand, you've got a whole host of people out there who retired under a given set of circumstances. And those people, okay, do you now go ahead and change the rules in the middle of the game on them, and all of a sudden they got to start paying? And Andy, I'll tell you, I've run into a lot of people that maybe are making $3,000 or $4,000 a year in their pension. Now these are older people
right,
who had a pension a long time. They're only getting $3,000 or $4,000. They got their Social Security on top of it, but it may only be $800 a month. And that 4.25% of that $3,000 is $150 roughly. That's a lot of money to those people because they're barely making it as it is, making all their payments and everything. So do you change the rules on those folks and start charging them tax when they retired under a certain set of circumstances? So with that consideration in mind, one of the things that's been advanced, and there's a zillion ideas up in Lansing,
right,
but one of them is, let's say, similar to what we have now, that for any pension, and I'll just pick some numbers, these don't mean anything, but maybe for an individual, the first $20,000 of your pension we won't tax. For a couple, the first $40,000 we won't tax. That helps protect the people that are at the bottom as far as economics are concerned, aren't getting much, okay, but still imposes a tax on the people at the top that can afford it a little bit more than the folks at the bottom. That idea is being passed around. Another idea is being passed around, and then I'll shut up here, is maybe we should grandfather it in so that anybody that retires after January 1 of 2012 will pay state tax. Anybody that's already retired, leave them alone. There's, as I say, there's a zillion ideas.
But if you do that, you're still going to have a big hole in the making up the business tax.
Correct. And if you, in that hole then becomes a question of how do you fill that hole. The governor's proposal for the pension tax, it would raise about $900 million. Okay. If you did the 2040 thing that I talked about, that would raise about $300 million. So you'd have a $600 million hole. Then the question becomes, how do you fill that hole? Well, we're preparing budgets in the Senate that are going to fill part of that hole by additional cuts in the general fund budget. There's also been proposals to do some different things with the with the S corporations and the partnerships and so on, taxing them a little bit more. So as I say, there's a zillion things going around, but you can't get the budgets done until you know what your tax policy is going to be, and that's going to be the big discussion. One
thing that I wanted to ask you about, and full disclosure, I'm a teacher, so I have a dog in this race, a little bit, or a horse in the race, but we've been cut, and then finally there's a surplus in the K-12 budget this year, and we think we're finally going to get some of this money back, and we're getting a huge cut again. And a lot of people around here are very concerned about that. Why is it happening? How is a surplus being turned into a cut, and where do you come down on that?
Well, the governor's proposal was to do this. In the school aid fund, it has always traditionally been K-12 money only. Last year, there was a deficit, and the legislature took about $200 million, roughly, out of the school aid fund because there was more money in the school aid fund. They transferred it out and gave it to the community colleges. And that basically covered a late in the year $200 million deficit. The governor's now come out this year, and he's proposed to take $700 million out of the school aid fund to give to the universities. These would be the four-year schools. And he's proposed to take $300 million, roughly, out of the, I guess it's about $200 million out of the school aid fund to give to the community colleges. That's $900 million. But then at the same time, he's turned around and he's taken general fund money and putting it back into the school aid fund that amounts to about $400 million. So that's a head scratcher for me. I don't know why that's happening. He's taken $900 out. He's putting $400 back in. So it ends up creating a $500 million hole in the school aid fund. And that $500 million is what you're hearing is being attributed to the schools that, you know, we've got to cut and so on and so forth. The other piece of this is a year ago, the school aid fund, the schools were cut $170 a kid. But they never got that cut because the federal government gave us all this stimulus money, and a chunk of that went in to cover that $170 deficit. The schools knew that that money from the federal government was a one-time thing. They knew that was the case. So now this year, we don't have that money anymore. So we've got that 170 they were cut a year ago. They never saw it, but that cut's going to go into effect this year. And you've got another $300 that the governor's proposing to cut. That's $470. Then the other piece of this puzzle is there's another $230 that the schools are going to get hit with to fund the retirement system for the school employees. That thing is going up. The cost of that is going up like crazy. So you put all that together and you're talking $700. Now, there's been some real concern about taking this money out of the school aid fund for the community colleges and for the universities. And I might add, they have told me many times we did not ask for this, okay? But if you look at the Constitution of Michigan, and I remember back in '94 when we voted for Proposal A, nothing was ever said about universities and community colleges. Right. But in the Constitution, it says that the school aid fund can be used for K-12 and higher education. But now the interesting thing comes, if you read further in the Constitution, higher education, and if you look at court cases, higher education is defined as schools that hand out four-year degrees. Well, that would mean then that community colleges are not higher education. I've asked for an attorney general's opinion on whether or not they are and whether or not we can fund them and so on. I haven't got an answer back yet, okay, which tells me a lot, but that's beside the point. So this whole thing is going to come down to a situation of how should we handle the school aid fund. And I will tell you, Andy, if we look at what's happened this fiscal year, now that goes back to last October 1st up to the present time, we are about $75 million ahead in the general fund of what we thought we were going to have. We don't have March's numbers yet. We're $75 million ahead, but the school aid fund is flat. In other words, it's coming in right at what we thought. So there's going to be some looking at that. And, you know, I can't get into details about private conversations and everything else. All I can tell you is that whole thing that you've brought up is being looked at, and there's some concern about the schools are going to get a cut anyway. There's going to be some kind of a cut. But there's some concern about whether or not taking this money out the way we are is appropriate.
I think probably one of the big picture questions is you talk about cutting unemployment, you talk about cutting the schools, possibly devastating cuts to the schools. You talk about taxing senior citizens' pensions, and all of this is to give huge tax cuts to big businesses. And the idea being that they're going to hire more people, and more businesses will come in and hire people. And I know this is probably an economic philosophy question, but I read the paper, and a lot of big businesses are just taking profit. I mean, they're just, they're doing pretty well right now, but instead of hiring, they're just enjoying bigger profits. How do you make sure that this money that he's proposing will be used to hire people and create jobs, which we all want and all would agree with, and won't be just used to make rich people a lot richer than they already are?
That's a good question. And I think the answer to that question is that we don't focus in this state on big business. We focus in this state on small business, entrepreneurs, startups. We have got to reinvent ourselves in Michigan, and I've said this for years. We've got to focus on our own people. They'll stay here, they'll hire here, and they won't take off on us. And not to use a name, but you can look right out here at Kurt Schoenauer. And Kurt Schoenauer is still here through all this. He's kept Quality Industries out here and kept them going. Okay, our own local people will stick with us. And what's happened, if you look over the years, is that when the old timers that started a factory or started a business, when they get ready to retire and they sell out to a bigger corporation, that's when all this closing down and moving out and all that kind of stuff starts happening. We as a state, I believe, have got to hitch our wagon to small business owners, entrepreneurs, and those are the folks we got to focus on. Now, what do they tell me that they need? Okay, they tell me, number one, they've got to have relief from workers' comp costs. Okay, and there's a lot of things that can be done there without cutting benefits to the workers. Number two, they've got to have relief for unemployment insurance costs. If you're a small business owner in this state today, you have to pay on yourself, as the owner of that company, full unemployment insurance costs. One of two things can happen when you close the business, and if you close the business and you go out. Either A, you get no unemployment insurance, that's about half of them, or B, you get 7 weeks worth. That's the other one. Now contrast that to the average worker that's getting 99 weeks, okay? And these small business owners, okay, they can't get that, but they've got to pay in the full shot every year they're there. That's not right, okay? Another thing that we've got to talk about in this state, and I keep hammering away at it in Lansing, is the personal property tax. The personal property tax is a very bad tax. And, I've told people, I voted for the MBT back when it came through because it gave a considerable amount of personal property tax relief to the manufacturing businesses in this state, but it also gave a little bit to the smaller guys. That tax affects small business owners. So when you ask this question about trying to recreate the climate, in Bruce Caswell's mind, it's not about big business. Mm-hmm. In Bruce Caswell's mind, it's about focusing, changing the structure of this state so small business people can be successful. And I was just out this morning to a meeting that we had out at Warner's. A room full of people, there's probably 50 people there. And it all had to do with how you register your trucks and how you meet US DOT requirements and everything else, and so on and so forth. Matter and hops. And the bottom line that I heard repeatedly said is that, you're just driving us out of business. Now, some of these rules come from the feds that they're complaining about, some of them from the state, but for those that come from the state, we got to take care of. So when I look at this stuff, that's what I'm looking at. That's how I look at it. Is it going to help the little guy, the small business owner? And if it does, I'm going to vote for it. And the bottom line is, there's nothing free. Nothing. We're all going to pay eventually. And we're starting to get that figured out. So how do we encourage an entrepreneurial climate? How do we invest in our own people and make this climate in Michigan attractive enough that we'll keep people here and that they'll start their business here? Because you know what, Andy? 1,000 small businesses only got to hire one person apiece, and we got a whole bunch of people employed. And you don't get any big businesses anymore that'll come in and hire 1,000 people. So spread your eggs out, don't put them all in one basket, and get after it.
We've already gone over time, but I have ask you a couple of quick ones from our listeners, the constituents of Bruce Caswell, the state senator, kind enough to go overtime with us here on a Friday afternoon. This one says, would the senator support or introduce legislation to exempt townships of less than 5,000 people from the OSHA, MIOSHA rules, regs, especially pertaining to fire departments?
That's a very good question. Now, I can't say yes to that because I don't know all the implications to it, but I will tell you this. I've heard from a lot of fire departments. a lot of the rules that are being stuck on them are coming from the feds, and it's really creating a huge hardship for our volunteer firefighters with all the training they've got to do, all the extra work they have to do, and they don't get paid a lot of money. And it is a real problem. I would say this, whoever wrote that question, if you could send me an email up to Lansing, and it's SENB Caswell at senate.michigan, and you got to spell the whole word out, .gov, G-O-V. You send me an email with that respect, and what I'll promise you is I will look into it, and whatever needs to be changed at the state level, I will try to do that. Whatever needs to be changed at the federal level, I'll send a letter on to Tim Wahlberg and make him aware of it. And I can't do anything about those boys out there, those boys and girls, but I think that's the best way to handle it. But it is a problem.
Another caller writes and asks, is the federal shutdown going to affect disabled veterans' monthly pensions?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. That's a federal issue. It's VA money, and that's federal. If you want to call my office, we'll try to find out for you. And there's people up there today. You can call 517-373-5932. 373-5932. And we'll see if we can get a hold of somebody out in Washington to find out.
Another person, and again referencing the pricing bill repeal.
Item pricing, yep.
This person writes, how long will it take the state to recoup the $2 billion they say this is going to save?
The state won't recoup it. The comments that the governor made are dollars that would be saved by the companies that have to currently do this thing. And so if it goes away, those companies are the ones that would save the money, not the state of Michigan. And I might add this, too. I want to add this in the end. There was a compromise at the end, and the item pricing bill is going to go into effect September 1st. It's not going to happen right away. So September 1st is when it will go into effect. So up until that time, the current law still applies.
It's a fascinating time to be up in Lansing. Some real changes happening with our new governor, and you've been up there for a few months now. Is it dramatically different being a senator from a House rep?
Yes, it's a lot different, and I'll tell you the whole atmosphere in Lansing's a lot different. Now, I know there's people who don't like Governor Snyder. I understand that. The guy, whether you agree with him or whether you don't agree with him, the guy's got a vision. He knows where he wants to go. And I don't agree with everything that he has proposed. I agree with 90 or 95% of it. But at least there's direction, and we know where we're going, where he wants to go. Now, there will be sidetracks and everything else. But to me, that's good. If you're going to be the boss, I don't care if you're a head coach in football, you got to know what you're going to do every practice. And, at the end of the day, if that head coach doesn't produce wins on the field, he gets let go. Been there and done that. Same thing in politics. At the end of the day, if we don't produce results, then we ought to be let go.